All right, I think we're on. Hello and welcome to Marketing Live. Marketing Live is part of a Higher Ed Live network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in the archives of higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be a part of our broadcast by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using hashtag HigherEdLive on Twitter. You can receive weekly updates and live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. Today's show would not be possible without the support of M. Stoner and FormStack. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Two never-before-released chapters from M. Stoner's book Social Works and Follow the Leader are now available for download as audio chapters. We're tweeting out a link where you can download these chapters for free and learn more about M. Stoner's helpful resources. FormStack is an online form builder, and you can go and your go-to for higher ed website conversions. FormStack makes it easy for marketers to create branded, mobile-ready web forms without writing code, build donation forms, application forms, event registrations, and more with the web's only Section 508 compliant form builder. Interact with your audience on social media using FormStack's Facebook tab or social media autofill features. For even more conversion, use FormStack's robust analytics data to refine your form. FormStack also partners with popular marketing applications so you can nurture your leads more effectively. Visit formstack.com to learn more about the ways FormStack can double your response rates and increase conversions today. So let's dive into our topic. Over 85% of student leaders on college campuses are involved in Greek communities. So with hundreds of thousands of current student members, it is imperative that we communicate effectively with these campus advocates. Tune in today. We're going to talk about with some of our fantastic experts about how to connect with this powerful group and help them become our brand ambassadors. We have Jason Merriweather. He is the Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs at Indiana University Southeast. Welcome, Jason.
Hello, and I'm glad to be here. Hey, everybody.
Excellent. And we have Maggie Hayes, the Coordinator for Sorority Life at DePaul University, and Myrna Hernandez, the Assistant Dean of Students for Campus Living and Community Development at DePaul University, and has been working with fraternities and sororities at DePaul since 2009.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you. And we also have Kenny Jones, the Associate Director of Fraternity and Sorority Life at the University of Pennsylvania and a member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here. I'm so excited.
So welcome to you all. We're very excited. Now, if any of our users have any questions, please tweet us using hashtag HigherEdLive, and we'll try to answer any questions you might have. So let's dive right into some of the questions. The Greek community is especially involved on campus and therefore incredibly busy. So what do you think are some of the best ways to communicate effectively with them and make sure our efforts don't end up in the spam category? Who wants to dive in first?
Well, I will just share from my experience. I think mass large emails do not work. I think especially when we send them specifically to chapter presidents and ask them to spread that message to their chapters, they get a lot of those emails, and so then they are spending more time going through them and trying to figure out what should be forwarded on and what shouldn't. So any mass email like that is not going to make it.
So what do you think, like personalized emails? Like how would you?
I think personalized emails work, also utilizing the councils or the fraternity and sorority life office. I think a chapter president gets an email from someone that they know, it's easier to connect, like, oh, I need to be doing this right now, versus if they're getting it from a random person that they may know somewhere on campus. It's not that that email is not important to them, but it's a little harder for them to, like, keep track of everything.
What I found as really helpful is kind of going back to two things. One, the age-old additive of face-to-face time. I find that a lot of times, of course, we have a lot of things to do as professionals, but I think that what works best if you are actually meeting them where they are. So if you don't want to end up in spam, then you have to essentially be in their faces. So that means going to chapter meetings. That means essentially calling meetings so you can have some face-to-face one-on-one time. I also like doing coffee with my chapter presidents. I think that that's totally appropriate, especially if it's on campus. You want to go and find them where they're hanging out and saying, hey, let's do lunch. Let me meet you in the food court or the dining hall or wherever, you know, your campus has where students are kind of eating and drinking. And I find that that has been very helpful.
I would totally agree. It's really about being present. Oh, by the way, since Kenny got to announce, I want to be clear that I am a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, A Phi and 6.
Of course.
And for good measure. Now, with that in mind, I want to be clear that Kenny's absolutely right. It's all about the relationship that you have with students, so you're not a stranger. Sometimes our communication is not just getting people to attend an event or getting people to show up. Sometimes we have to deal with tough situations and make tough asks of our Greeks. Sometimes we have to introduce some challenging policy changes to them. Sometimes it's needing them to help lead to kind of quiet some other storms perhaps on campus. And those things really begin by having a relationship that exists. Show up, be present at their events. I use social media as a very heavy tool to let the Greeks know that I'm there. I take pictures with them. You know, I show up. I donate to their philanthropies when they're having fundraisers. And so that way, when me or when people on my team need something, it's like, hey, yeah, we remember them. They came up here at 9 o'clock at night to support our event. And they weren't only talking to us about hazing. They were talking to us about what we're doing on campus. And so the presence in the relationship really is the key to communication, because even though they get a lot of stuff, they'll look for something from us. And also, I use social media to communicate. If I want my campus to have information, tweeting it to our Greek council, the number of retweets, I have like maybe 2,500 followers, and some of them are on my campus. And you know, the retweet factor for sending something to 8 fraternities and sororities, the reach can be exponential that way.
Excellent. All right, I have to ask, are you guys in any sororities or fraternities now that the guys got to share?
Right, I was like, I guess I need to share. I'm a proud member of Delta Gamma.
Excellent.
And I'm representing the student affairs professionals that are unaffiliated.
Yes.
Still working with Greek organizations. We exist.
Oh, totally need it. Absolutely.
Excellent. So out of curiosity, is the ways that you build relationships different for sorority members versus fraternity members? So are some of the fraternity members more comfortable with doing the coffee, and some of the sorority members would rather that you schedule an appointment with them? So is it different per different groups, or is it totally unique based on the type of sorority or fraternity it is?
I would definitely say that it's completely unique. I mean, every student shows up with a completely different need. And you have to also think about, you're talking about, on our campus, we have 51 different chapters over 3 councils, and that's 3,300 students. So each council needs something different, each chapter needs something different, each chapter president needs something different, and then taking that and unpacking that more, each individual student needs something different. So absolutely. I think that it really helps when you show up in the beginning, when you set the stage from jump, that this is how I show up, however you need me to communicate things to you. If you're an email person, then I will meet you there. If you're great on social media, I will meet you there. If you want to see me, I will meet you there. So I think it's as on the professional to really gauge that for your community, which differs week to week to week to week. I find myself like having to change my communication strategy almost every week. Like one week, a chapter president would be like, I would love to meet with you. And then another week, I am bogged down in homework, so I can't meet, but I would love to see an email. So I guess it's completely unique.
And what's funny about Kenny's perspective is that while you have to meet the different needs, we still have to show consistency, because if you show up at the Pi Kappa Alpha event and you're constantly communicating and meeting with Pi Kappa Alpha, and they're always in your office, or be it Pike, or if it's Zeta Phi Beta, and then the teaks begin to say, okay, they're getting a lot of time in that campus? What's going on? So while we have to have this sort of adaptive vitality to meet the needs of individual students, we're still stuck having to make sure that we balance the sort of face time that each organization gets, especially when it's around time for rush or time for intake. That balance is really very important. And so everyone on my team, we have to be cognizant of that. On my campus, I'm extremely present with the Greeks. I'm always there at their stuff. You know, people can come and meet me. For example, the Pikes had a consultant from Memphis who was on campus, and so I met with their consultant. And so the Teeks had a consultant on campus not long after that, and I was actually off work that day. But I knew I'd given the Pikes consultant time, so I had to give the Teeks consultant that time too, and it was really great. So I actually came into work just to have that meeting, because we have to be consistent with that, because they can find disparity pretty easily sometimes, even if we're not trying to give it.
Agreed.
Excellent.
One of the things I would add is, in terms of being able to communicate with folks, I'm able to, a lot of times in my role, be able to get to them on the front end. So I'm not just reaching out to them when there's a problem that needs addressed or that a policy that's changing, but I'm able to do it on the front end sometimes and seek their input. So anytime that I reach out to a chapter and ask for their voice, so whether it's the chapter president or whether it's a representative of their chapter, giving them the opportunity to have some input into the work that we do in this office helps a ton. It gets me a good response in that particular, for that particular request, but then also allows me to continue to communicate with them throughout the year at different times when I do need some of those other things.
Excellent. So that brings up a really good point. So what types of information are they interested in, and like what would really connect with them? So I work in the Career Center, and I've also worked with dining, and what are ways that we can, what's going to resonate with them? Is it, you know, job opportunities, or if you're in rec sports, like, what are some things you can do that will like demonstrate your value and help build that relationship?
I think you bring up a good word there, value. Each one of our organizations recognized on our campus has a set of values in which they should be living by. I find that it's really good to connect what they're doing in their national organizations with how they are carrying themselves on campus. And so maybe if there's like scholarship is a value of your sorority or fraternity, they're really interested in hearing about how I can be better in the classroom. How can I be a better role model for students who may be not only interested in my organization, but maybe first-year students who are struggling to get through their classes. Service is another value. I mean, there's a word cloud of values when you think about all of the organizations. So I find that, especially with the typical college student, people they're thinking about jobs, but are also thinking about social opportunities too, like how I can get more of my learning outside of the classroom, and being able to do it through our own organization. So I think that the best way to really get to them is finding out what their values are as organizations, as individuals, and what they want to do moving forward.
Excellent.
And what I found is that often the Greeks are looking to not necessarily always get the Greek message.
Right.
I think that it's really important that we capture their values and interests, and we play to that, but also Greeks want to have opportunities sometimes to just be a student as well, because you can miss things if you say, oh, well, you know, this group won intramurals every year, so we'll contact them every time there's something for intramurals, you know. And so we've got to, it's so funny, because every time I hear Kenny speak, I'm like, yes, 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 and then as everyone on the talk knows, then we have those segments of Greeks who will push back and say, well, yeah, that does work for like half the chapter. Yeah. Then there's us, right?
Right.
And that is such a challenge, because this is a group that's great on campus. They perform, and we have to play to their strengths and just sometimes be cautious that we're not falling into some of the stereotypes. And then at the same time, if there are community service events that are out there, sometimes one of the things that you can do is you can shape your campus service projects and philanthropy, going back to, as Kenny said, the values that the organizations have, and say, hey, you know, we're doing some of this stuff. I know it's your philanthropy. How can we partner? Can we get your graduate chapter here? Can we get people from your regional or from your nationals involved? What are ways that we can do this to really partner? And then just my last little point on this is that where we can get stuck with Greeks, if we're not extremely cautious, is that sometimes there are Greeks who are just happy to say, hey, I'm glad to be there, I'm glad to get the message, but can I wear my t-shirt? Can I just wear my letters?
Right.
You know, that's all. We just want to wear our letters. You know, we want to do that and then let them get out and to kind of fall in that. You have to be careful during rush time to make sure we're not breaking any rules with that. But, you know, sometimes the Greeks are glad to come if they just have the benefit of wearing their t-shirt or, you know, take pictures. On my campus, our Greeks doubled the amount of community service. Our Greeks are responsible for like 40% of the community service hours last school year. And that was amazing because the Greeks we have like a lot of student organizations. And so with that, we did a press release about it. That was like the biggest deal to our Greeks, that on the university website there was a press release about their work and their community service, and they got their own time, their own space. And so sometimes communication is reaching out, but also sometimes it's telling their story. And when they know we care, they are definitely ready to engage the next time we have an ask.
Very cool. What do you think, ladies? Anything to add to that?
I would echo what was just said about sharing the good things. I think specifically within fraternity and sorority life, so much of what is shared, not only just within your campus, but outwardly, are the negative things. And I'm not saying that those don't exist. They absolutely do. But I think it almost allows it to perpetuate more if we don't also talk about the good things that are happening. You know, if I know that a chapter president has been dealing with a really tough issue within her chapter, even if I just send an email to my boss letting NCC her on the email that says, like, she did a really great job and I'm really proud of her, little bits of praise, I think go a long way.
I think the thing I'd add is, Amy, you said specifically if the Career Center is trying to reach out to a specific population, or if the rec sports folks, you know, I hate to go back to what Jason said at the beginning, but it is about those relationships, and particularly on a small campus like ours, students are really plugged in to the folks they know here, the folks they know that work here, the folks they know that show up to their events, that reach out to them in other ways. And I think the other thing, too, that we've been really trying to do here is to make sure that when folks are reaching out to our chapters, that it's nice to copy the chapter president, but that the chapter president shouldn't be the only one getting tapped. And so if you're going to do a service event, then it is about figuring out who that student is in that particular chapter that works on that particular project, right? So it keeps the chapter president from having to funnel every single piece of information from every single entity on campus.
Oh my Lord, who has time for that?
Right. We don't have time for that, so they certainly don't either.
Well, we do have a great question from Nadine on Twitter. How do you advise them to promote their brands on campus in a positive way, helping them get away from negative stereotypes?
So the question I've been asking chapters that I've been working with is, if you were going to be known for one thing on this campus, what would it be? And whatever their answer is, they're very different answers. You know, well, how are you doing that? What are you doing to demonstrate that? How would people know that? What do people see from your chapter? So I think those are the conversations, particularly because the chapters I work with are chapters that I'm intervening with in some way or another. But I try to ask them that question. If you were going to be known for one thing on this campus, what would it be?
I think along those lines, too, you also have to get them to recognize the things that are holding them back from that being what they're known for. Because once they're able to own that that's either the perception or that's what campus or the community is feeling, it's much easier to make a game plan in terms of, if this is what's holding us back, how do we get from point A to point B? Just have to own it.
And additionally, it's getting them the opportunity to tell their story. I have to brag on my team again. Like my campus life team, Chanel Barber is my Greek life director, and we had this awesome intern named Drew Lale. So they helped develop a blog for our Greeks. It's on the university website. You can go to our website. You can get right to it. Where once a month, every Greek took over the blog, and they could write as much or as little as they wanted, and it gave them a chance to tell their story. And then from the university side, we tweeted some things. You know, we tweeted out, we put some of the blog posts on Facebook. You know, the coolest thing for the Teeks blog, like I tweeted theirs and I copied Nationals, and Nationals retweeted their blog. That was the biggest deal for them because they had the opportunity to tell their story, and we gave them a venue to do it. Because oftentimes when students come to campus, they have all these stereotypes somewhere between Animal House, How High, and other movies about what fraternity life can be on campus, and there are many others that I won't name. And so our encouragement to the students was, hey, when the students are looking online, we want them to see more than just pictures. We want them to see more than just your crest and some names. We really want them to hear from you, and that's been powerful. And so this year, you know, our Greeks are already saying, okay, well, I want the blog first. I want it in August. You know. Last year it was like, okay, come on, right. This year it's like, hey, we're ready to go. So they had the chance to tell their own story.
I appreciate that perspective, especially about the power of story. As a portraitist, I think that people's lived experiences is where you get the best work, right? And so when you allow for students to be able to be themselves and be able to show up, they will show up authentically if you show up authentically, right? So I think that as professionals, it is important for us to talk about the work. I would take that a step further and say we have to be the work, right? And so what that means is like, okay, so if you are someone who is advising us and trying to lead us down a very positive path, how is it that I'm going to be able to connect with you, right? And what are your experiences like? And even for non-affiliated professionals, they can talk about what their experiences were like when they were in undergrad with Greek life and how that has transformed over into a passion of theirs. And so I think that one of the things that really gets them away from that negative stereotype is really putting it in their face and saying, listen, this is what the nation sees right now about Greek life. But when it comes to our particular community, we know that you're the best in the world. You have to have vision. You have to understand how to communicate that vision. And then you also have to show up in that vision in order for Greeks to be able to say, well, wow, we can move away from what's going on in the country and we can be our own amazing entity on this campus.
Excellent. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit sad you didn't mention my favorite fraternity movie of all time, Monsters University. It's been a long time working at Disney, and that encompasses everything that Greek life is all about. So we do have a good question from Keith Garcia on Twitter. Thank you for following us, Keith. So given the disparity of resources between some members of the fraternity and sorority community, how do we ensure that all groups garner visibility?
I think that's something that the campus has to own.
Yeah.
We can't necessarily control what's in the bank account for every organization. We can give ideas. You know, we can certainly influence and help with ways to have fundraisers and things like that to offset some of those things organizationally and in terms of the social events. But in terms of access, we control that message. You know, we have a handle on, as administrators, we know who can get tables and, you know, for events on campus. We can communicate. We can help with things. We can help with presence. You know, even though there may be one organization who can buy these 12 by 18 letters, I'm talking about like one letter, 12 feet by 18 feet for the A, and, you know, 13 feet by 17 feet for the Phi and all that. You know how we'll do. And so with that in mind, there are other organizations who don't have that. But hey, you know, if they can't afford the big tablecloth, can we find a good black one from the cafeteria and hook that up? You know, there are ways that we can do things to help with presentation. Or sometimes we can drill down a bit and say, okay, we'll provide the setup, we'll provide the space. What I found to really solve that disparity issue is folks just want to know, as we talked about earlier, it's about consistency. Was my organization given the same chance to be present? Was my organization given the same chance to follow rules? I remember when I was an undergrad at the University of Louisville, the MPHC, we didn't like that there were certain times during orientation that we couldn't wear letters, because the IFC and the Panhandle organizations couldn't wear letters because of their rush process versus the MPAC intake process, which is different. And so that was a huge issue for us. And so in arguing with that, it was one of those things where we really had to sit down and communicate and say, hey, there's some differences in how we do this. We would like to get this policy amended. It's not a blanket policy. But it started with the conversation, because sometimes what we have to do is make sure the students understand that the disparity isn't intentional. Sometimes the access to the disparity issue by the university isn't intentional. Then sometimes there may be some cases where you may find that, you know, there's some campuses where MPAC has one advisor, Panhandle may have 13 advisors, you know, and so it's about access and resource, and it's really incumbent upon us as administrators to make sure that the balance is there, it's fair, it's clear, it's apparent, and it's logical, but most of all, it's fair.
I think I agree 100% with you, Jason. I would also add that it's on administrators to be very strategic and intentional about community development. And not just as a buzzword, but actually looking at the entire community, looking at all three councils and figuring out where can we as an office be able to provide equitable opportunities for the entire community to be seen. Yes, there's completely different ways in which we recruit. There's different ways we have intake. There's all these different national things. And of course, everybody has their own stuff. But at the same time, as an office, our role, and when I say office, I mean professionals, our role is to ensure that we're intentional with our equitable policies on real community development. Excuse me. I think that a lot of times, like especially here at Penn, when there is particularly organizations with literally 3 people, and then you have organizations with almost 300 people, it's a really fine line between striking the balance between resources and where resources is coming from, and the communication of where those resources are coming from. And sometimes that means you have to have some conversations, back to what we said earlier, some authentic conversations about, hey, they as an organization may have the means to be able to raise their own money, but when you come here, you're going to get equitable treatment. We're going to make sure the community is seen on an equitable level on all fronts.
Excellent.
I agree. I think it's a university priority. I think administration plays a role. We're lucky here that we have a student allocations board that helps in that process, and so students have a means and a mechanism to go somewhere else to get resources. And when students are able to see the value in the programmatic pieces, at least on our campus, they've been very generous. So I think that that's a part of it as well.
I would also add, I think it's a very it could seem really simple, but finding chapters that have like problems or have a like situation, or even if they just want to do a program that are kind of similar in nature, and get them to work together. You know, the chapter with 3 and the chapter with 300, why can't they do their event together versus one chapter having an abundance and another chapter not? Builds community.
If I could back on that as well, one of the things too, and as I listen to myself speak, I've said MPAC, IFC, Panhandle. I've given no credence to multicultural organizations. Oftentimes, in terms of disparity, many times the multicultural fraternity and sororities are often the ones who face those issues. And I want to make sure that I bring that to light, because oftentimes we get so caught up in kind of the big 3 that we miss those organizations who are younger, still struggling for identity, and need that help and that support probably more than some of the established organizations sometimes. Additionally, I want to give some thought to campuses who have citywide chapters where, you know, the representation, for example, there's some cities where, let's say, there's a citywide chapter where on one campus there could be 30 of the members, but on another campus there could be 2 of the members. And so obviously that's kind of like, you know, if you're in charge of the neighborhood association, you know, you're going to make sure your yard gets mowed first sometimes. So it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like making sure that students who we may be doing everything that we can do on our campus, but internally there could be some things happening within the organization where there's a struggle, to make sure that we give address and credence to disparity that exists that way as well.
And I love that, and making sure that we're being all inclusive and promoting diversity among these groups and helping foster that community, I think is really important. And I know, Kenny, we were talking about this a little bit before. You wrote your dissertation on some of that. So do you have any tips for folks on how to make sure that we're communicating effectively and helping foster that all inclusivity across grounds or across campus?
I think that the one thing that a lot of times, specifically as student affairs professionals, we get caught up in this word culture, big C, small c, culture. I think that the biggest disparity is that a lot of us, and I include myself in that, we're not really aware of the tacit culture. So if I may, there's this big culture around what we say at interest meetings, what we're going to tell you if you're interested in our organizations, what conversations as a chapter are we going to have with our advisors. That's what we call the external explicit culture. And then when you talk about the implicit internal culture, you're talking about the things that we're only going to talk about at chapter meetings, our secrets, our rituals, things that we do that is just internal. But then there's this like little piece of culture called tacit, T-A-C-I-T culture, that talks a lot about what's happening in the group me's, what's happening in the secret Facebook groups, the conversations that people are having to themselves. So as administrators, if we're not aware of all three of the levels of culture, we will never be able to communicate the disparity, right? So I think it's really us rolling our sleeves up as administrators, getting very dirty, and saying what's really going on in our campuses, in our cultures, in our fraternities and sororities and our chapters, so that we can effectively be able to address it. And I also think that it's really important for it not to be in a punitive nature. We have to understand that these are students and that they're learning, and things are going to be, that is not going to make a lot of sense to us, but that's because we've lived through that and we're like, oh my gosh, please don't make that mistake. But these
all the time.
These students they don't have that particular experience yet. So there's a lot of patience and I find that students will be a lot more receptive to the education if it's not in a punitive approach.
That's a good point. What do you think, ladies?
I would fully agree. And I think, especially if communication is only happening in a punitive way, you can try to give them like $1 million. They're not going to care, because humans, it's human nature to just want to connect with people. And so you have to do it. Not saying that the punitive communication shouldn't happen, because it should. People make mistakes. Yeah. But you have to have both in order for it to really make an impact.
Excellent. And we do have one question from Ernest Evans from Twitter. Thank you for following, Ernest. In a time of protest and unrest in our country over police brutality, how do you challenge your Greeks to be advocates?
I think this is about live messaging. On our campuses, especially in the wake of what happened in Oklahoma, and I had the opportunity to be on the show with Heather about that after the SAE incident. And one of the things that I said then that I'll use to lead into my statement now is that I don't believe that holistically the mission of most of these organizations really speaks to those sort of injustices. We just get people who get in them, who take it in a whole nother direction. Mm-hmm. And if we're not cautious, and it's one of those things where it's almost like I tell a new professional, sometimes you've just got to check an issue. And part of our work is, as much as we put energy into working with Greeks on peer intervention with hazing, peer intervention with sexual assault, I think right now we have to also put energy into peer intervention and training to manage and mitigate issues of injustice and biased language and hateful actions and how we're making decisions. Sometimes I shake people up because I say that doesn't just work with a young black student who wants to get into an IFC organization. What happens, I'll use Kenny as an example. One of the things I love about Phi Beta Sigma, they are diverse. As an MPAC fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma is diverse everywhere you go. I've known like probably three or four chapters where I've been where they're extremely diverse, and I'm not just speaking in terms of black and white, but in terms of that, and you see that with a lot of organizations. So what happens sometimes in the culture with NPAC organizations, with sororities, where we want to make decisions about who we let in. That also falls into social economic decisions about who we let in our organizations and how we treat people and how we treat people on campus. And it goes back to if we're drawing into movies, you know, I'll pull out. Well, I'll go back to Monster University. That's a great example where, you know, we kind of have this have and have not culture socially that exists. So the attack there has to be that we educate students from the beginning, have conversations during rush, during intake about justice and social justice and what that looks like. That social justice isn't this harbinger where it's the thou shalt not list. It's the no, this is how you can challenge list. Because I found many people in these organizations who do want to push back on the negativity, but they haven't been empowered how. And sometimes if one person speaks up, other people can join them, and that's across organizations. But there's so many things that we have to fight to challenge those issues. I'm sorry to get long-winded on that, but it really is deep, and we can't just have one talk at orientation and magically everything is okay.
True.
You know? Because organizations are still having fights about letting LGBT students in. Issues of race, diversity, all of that. And so we've got to make sure that in terms of membership and inclusivity and the way the civility that we see happen on our campuses, we have to hit those conversations over and over and over again. And for every student affairs professional watching, we all own a piece of that. We all own a piece of that.
I would agree with that. Continued engagement is one of the most amazing and effective ways in getting to these kind of issues. Again, I go back to always thinking about our students are impeccably smart, but sometimes they're still trying to navigate what this feels like. As a professional, I even remember personally being affected by a lot of the things that were happening in the world, and that was impactful to my students when they saw how it impacted me. And I understand that, like, as a professional, I have to be very careful about what messages are being sent out to particular chapters, but it was power in being able to say this impacts me as a professional, and I'm interested in how it impacts you, and then really coaching them into how they can advocate for not only themselves, their chapter members, and their friends who are non-affiliated. So I think that a lot of that powerful messaging was like, wow, we see Kenny being impacted, so we can go to him and have conversations about how this impacts us, or how we feel bad that it doesn't impact us. And I think that sometimes both of those spectrums has to be to be addressed, but it's only addressed through continued engagement. It can't be like Jason said, one conversation and then, yay, we got the cultural relevancy check off the box. We can't do that. It has to be continued engagement throughout the year.
And it's like what you guys were saying before about how our messaging and our relationship building, if one group won the intramural thing, we can't only be talking to them about that. We have to make sure that our messages are diverse and that we're helping on our end cultivate their thinking about making sure that they're being all inclusive. Because let's say we have one of the members is not athletic and doesn't want to be in the intramurals. I think that's a really good point, is that we're helping foster it and talk about it ongoing and making sure it's in the front of their minds.
Yeah.
I think creating opportunities for students to interact with one another and have those moments of dialogue, both within their organization and across their organization, are very important. I think particularly in large organizations. We've found this spring and over the past year and a half that within the organization, folks haven't had these conversations, so they don't know how their brothers or sisters are impacted, how it's affected them. So I think part of our job is to be able to create the opportunities and ask the questions so that they can have some form of shared dialogue around these issues as well.
Yeah, I also think helping, especially students who may not feel or may have not had the opportunity to connect with it on a really personal level yet, for whatever reason, helping them find their role and find little things that they can do every day within their chapter, even if it's like hey, that joke offended me. Like, baby steps like that get people to take ownership of it as well.
Yeah, encouraging them to stand up. So, well, going back to kind of some of the cores of marketing communications, right? So we've talked a little bit about how emails, don't give them blast emails. Make sure you're developing the relationships when you're trying to get messaging through. And we talked a little bit about the different levels of community and how we have to be aware of those and kind of watch those. So how are they using social media? How are they using Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and Yik Yak? You know, what are the ways that, I mean, what should we be watching? What should we contribute to the conversation? Should we back off? Or, you know, if we see students saying stuff on Snapchat, would it be too big brother to go in there and be like, hey, stop it? You know, like what are the best ways to kind of make sure that we're helping these areas?
I wrote an article about this, and looking at Greek, I wrote kind of a series for Socialnomics of article posts, blog posts, articles, whatever you want to call them, about Greek life and social media. And one of the trends that I found is that more students in the Greek culture are intentional about their messaging and having conversations about representing themselves and knowing that, hey, if Kenny tweets this thing, Kenny didn't do that. Phi Beta Sigma did that.
Yeah.
No, and so it's making sure, you know, that they're having those kind of educative moments about the messaging that's out there. They're doing it to a degree, but it's really on us to get some time, and if we can't do it, get some experts to come to campus to do that. I had Josie Alquist on my campus, and she spent some time with students and had a great conversation about them, about digital reputation and branding and how that fits, and those things make a difference. The other thing is a lot of Greeks are using social media strategically. They're really using it to advertise for events, to push their philanthropy, to when people are running for office, like SGA president or student council, what have you. You're seeing them, you know, mobilize on social media and be very active. And so it's on us to get out there and to be mindful of saying, okay, I may not go and have a Twitter war with you, or I may not comment on Facebook and dress you down, but, you know, people take screenshots, you know, bring things. And things. So it's having conversations that what's private is never really private. And so kind of in that, we talk about that. In our book, What Happens on Campus Stays on YouTube, the group of us who did that, you know, had the awesome opportunity to work with Eric Qualman. That was me, Paul, Laura Pasquini, and Courtney. And when we got together and we wrote that, we put several examples in there kind of about situations gone wrong with Greeks in social media. It's really explaining that it's not just the branding, but it's also being mindful of university policies and being mindful of laws and privacy and those sort of things and how accountability works. And, you know, we've really got to have all of those conversations. And I know as a group, we've given our audience so much homework today, but here's the thing that we really have to own with our Greeks is we've got to get out there and we've got to have those conversations. And if we're not going to do it because we can and because we don't have the time, we've got to find the resources to bring in other experts or to find literature or to read up on things. And then what Kenny said earlier, just kind of about those cultures, kind of those subcultures that exist, I call it a clandestine culture that exists on social media for Greeks. And it's those spaces where they think it's private, you know, but I do stuff with hazing. And one thing I can tell you, I've seen more group me's and WhatsApp conversations used to bring organizations down when they're caught for their bad behavior and hazing than you would believe. And so it's really not only about having good behavior, but making good choices about how we do it digitally, because digital space is not quite the safe space our students think it is, and we have to be educators and purveyors of knowledge about that.
And I have to say, I absolutely love the title of What You Do on Campus Stays on YouTube. It's so great. I love that.
Thank you. I'm just lucky to be in the number.
So what do Myrna and Maggie think, coming from a smaller university, and how those folks use social media? Is it the same as large universities? Is it?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think most of our students are using it more to present what they want people to know about their organizations. And I think part of that is because for many years, I mean, when I was an undergrad, we had the conversations of like, never put a picture with 4 of you together and holding a red solo cup. You know, like there were so many rules about what you could and couldn't do that it almost pushed the negative things underground versus letting us have the real conversations about like, this is happening. It doesn't matter to me if it's in a picture, if it's not. I would rather have the conversation about what's going on in the picture that's not being posted on Facebook on the main Facebook page, but on their personal pages. So back to the Big Brother idea, I don't necessarily have a problem using things that I find on social media to have a conversation about behavior or choices that are being made. But I think it just has to be done in a way that doesn't feel like I'm out watching you and I see you, but more in like this happened, let's talk about it and make it better.
I think one of the ways we've seen our students take ownership of their own social media is this past spring, our Panhellenic created a campaign against Yik Yak, sort of this anonymous posting that and they wanted to, I can let Maggie actually talk about it, certainly, but I mean, I think it was great. I mean, I think that it was their stand against, you know what, people are posting some really negative things, and it reflects on all of us as a community, and so let's take this back and reclaim it and use it for positive posts only.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So they had a hashtag. Well, they had two. One was Yik Yak Yuck, and then the other one was put your name on it. And the whole idea behind it was about how whatever you say, your name is automatically affiliated with it, whether it's on your Twitter or if it's in a text message, your name is there. And it actually, we have a Prindle Institute for Ethics on our campus, and the week before they did a program on the ethics of anonymity, so it was pretty seamless. The campus was already having the conversation. And so then they were doing things, posting positive things with their name on it on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and yeah, kind of taking it back.
What a brilliant idea, because it's a lot easier to be a troll on Reddit and different websites if no one can see your face and no one who you are. So it's almost like a little bit of integrity, like just own up to it. Own up to what your opinions are, whether they're negative or positive. If they're really negative, you've got nothing nice to say all the time, people are going to start to stop listening to you. I love that.
Yeah, that was great.
Very cool. So I know we're getting close to running out of time. So before we end our show, to wrap up, what is the most important thing departments should consider when creating content for Greek communities?
I think that to take a stab, I think we should understand our Greeks. You know, we have to spend some time really conducting some assessment about our Greeks, you know, about what's going on with our Greeks, really understand the messaging they're looking for, really understand how they're looking to be communicated with. You know, I kind of said earlier, it's almost sort of an adaptive vitality that we have to use to get our messaging to reach. But also, I think we have to spend some time to assess and understand our Greek life culture and our campus community on the front end. And I think in doing that, that can help us with crafting our message. I think we also have to be clear that our mission and values are frequently present in our messaging. That we're not just, you know, going on a tangent and one day we're in Texas and the next day we're in Nevada with our conversations, but that there's some consistency to our mission and our values when we're speaking with our Greeks. And I think in doing that, that helps us frame messages by, one, being clear about what we have to say, two, being clear about the audience that's receiving our message, and three, really being consistent in the ways that we use that message, but at the same time being willing to adapt.
Excellent.
I think that there's a lot of important things people should consider, but I think one of the most important things is to understand that students love being Greek, by and large. I mean, there are, of course, some people, I mean, the individual examples, but just being able to understand that our students that are Greek love it, and they get a lot of their social, you know, opportunities from being Greek. They sometimes get their leadership from being Greek. They get networking skills from being Greek. So when you're thinking about content for the year, think about ways you can maximize on their particular experience and why they decided to go Greek in the first place. I know that when I decided to go Greek, it was because, it was a superficial reason, but Sigmas were the best steppers, and so I felt like that was one of the things that, you know, that attracted me to the organization. But and that's, you know, a very dramatic example, but figure out like why people are Greek and really meet them there. Most people really want just the social element, but a lot of them really want leadership development, and they want to be able to be seen as one of the most contributing factors to the campus. So really honing in on how we can make our Greeks being in the forefront in what they're doing on their campuses.
You know, I'm going to have to go Google your fraternity now, stepping, and have to see their sweet moves. If they're the best, I have to.
You would agree with that, right, Jason?
It depends on the step show.
I certainly think you have to know your campus. You have to get to know your students. You have to listen to their experiences, because it doesn't really matter what your message is or who you're trying to reach. It needs to resonate with them in some way, and really the only way for that to happen is for you to know your students and know what's going on campus, know what they're experiencing from day to day, and what the important issues are for them. So I think those are, for me, the most important things to think about.
I think in addition to what Myrna just said, I know somebody mentioned it earlier, but also being strategic about who you're sending the message to, because unfortunately in a lot of chapters the chapter president is not really the coolest or the one that everybody listens to, unless maybe it is more of a punitive situation. I'll say that because I was a chapter president and I was not the coolest. So sometimes you have to find the people that either really disagree with something and have the conversation with them to get their perspective more so than the people who are really getting it in our fraternities and sororities. So allowing more people to be a part of the conversation, and then also pointing messages more directly at people, I think is, if it applies to them, they buy in a lot more.
I think that a lot of and I remember when I first got into fraternity and sorority life professionally, one of the mistakes that I made was, like, I had my thought as to what the experience should be like for my students. And I was almost like forcing it, like, this is what you should be doing. And I had to remember that, like, wow, these are typically about teenagers and early 20s. And so I know when I said earlier meeting them there, some professionals will go, well, you know, sometimes they don't even know why they became Greek, but I would argue that they do. There's some reason, even if it's a reason that you don't agree with, there's a reason why they became Greek. And if it's something that's negative, then of course let's start having that discussion and helping them learn about what it means to be a part of our organization.
If I could jump in on top of that, one last thing. I have a beautiful 13-year-old daughter. Her name is Jasmine. And one thing I've learned raising a 13-year-old daughter is when she speaks, it's important to catch what she says. And Jazzy will sometimes tell me things without saying things. And so that aspect of parenting is a lot like dealing with Greeks. It's sometimes hearing the underlying message when they're talking to us. And if we're able to hear and to listen and to successfully capture the messages and the information they're trying to convey, it can help us really craft our messages and make sure that we're capturing their attention and really holding it. You know, again, as a parent, if I talk and Jazzy starts fiddling on her iPad, I'm like, okay, there's something wrong with my message and I have to adjust it. You know, I can't demand that she listens. You know, I mean, I can be a parent and say, you're going to sit here and listen. But in reality, if I really want her to hear me, I have to hear her first. And so where I'm going with that is that's a lot like Greek. And we really have to hear them first if we want them to attend to our message. Hearing our message, capturing our message, and attending to our message are three very different things. And so when you're working with Greeks, we have to be clear that we hear them to make sure that they hear us when it counts.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you all for being on our show, and I'd like to rally together with Maggie and Myrna to take the guys on, and I think we should start our own stepping team. And
Maggie's in. She's absolutely in.
Maggie.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, y'all. I had a great time, and I learned a lot about everything and how to communicate with these students and build connections with them, and y'all were wonderful. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and as always, you can check out more shows from Higher Ed Pros on higheredlive.com. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.